and hi. I asked ahead of time. Most of William's friends call him Bill, so I asked if it was okay if I called him Bill, and he said yes. So I'm hoping that means I'm now a friend. But so hi, Mark, and hi, Bill. Thanks for joining us from Australia, where it's 10:30 in the morning tomorrow, right?
It is, yes. We're a day ahead, but it's not the best weather. So no. Good evening to your viewers, and thanks for watching the film.
So I'm going to just start by asking you the simple question, which is, how did the two of you first meet? And Mark, how did you convince Bill? I would assume that it was when this project had already started, his art project had already started. And how did you convince him that you needed to make the feature film about
it? We did meet at the Human Rights Art and Film Festival in Melbourne, where Bill was doing a large picture. And he asked me to add my thumbprint to the side of the picture, as he was asking several other people, and that sort of that was the start. We had a good conversation at that point, and that was about 10 years ago. And we've worked a little bit together on some short films before this bigger film. And Bill had started his large picture in the State Library before we started filming, so he was already onto it. And I think it was seeing the work and talking about that started me thinking of in a bigger way, that the story extends internationally. It's a bigger picture, and it goes through quite a little bit of history there. And it just I just felt it needed to be told. And so we started talking about the idea, which Bill at first might have thought it was a shorter film, but ended up being a 3-year project. I'm glad he joined the party. Not that I was fooling him.
So, Bill, before we went live here, you mentioned to me about this annual trip that you've been taking for several years. Yeah. And that obviously in the film, the camera is following you around the globe, visiting your various friends in the worlds in the intersection of art and activism. Do you want to describe that trip for us and explain how that came to be and how many years you've been doing that?
Sure. I'll shorten it as much as I can, because it's 24,000 kilometers or so. But we'll do it in less than 40 minutes. What happens is that living in Australia, we are 12,000 miles away, from New York, right, the East Coast, or from Newburyport, right, for example, and and working in collaboration with a number of artists in different parts of the world, to go from Australia to Europe, to go to Australia to North America, and other places, or to South Africa, it takes so much time. And what I was able to work out with these people that I collaborate with pretty regularly is that they would be generous enough to allow me to fit in, or that they would fit in with my schedule if I created an annual visit to these places. And so I cut a number of very long trips down to one long trip, which is around the world trip. And that would mean that most years, this is going back 25 years now, most years I would leave Australia and go to South Africa, and then fly up to the Basque Country, to Guernica, where I spend a lot of time. And then on to France or Germany or London, and then on to Northern Ireland, and then to New York or somewhere in the Midwest, and then to Los Angeles, and then back home to Australia over 5 or 6 weeks. And when Mark had asked to do the film, and I agreed, I still had some of these projects that were needed to be completed. The dance project in New York City, for example, collaborative piece that I was working on, where there's a section that was filmed at the United Nations in Geneva and other places. So I had these things that I had to do, and Mark said he would like to come along and film this too, because he's been very, very good about the idea of this is not just my story, although he's focused on that artwork, but it's a bigger story. It's about people who believe in the idea of peace, about human rights, social justice, environment, and to bring these people in that I deal with on a regular basis, and to get their perspectives on this, and to show their work to some extent, which I was very pleased about. So yes, that was the trip. He and David Muir came along and then did some pickup people along the way, pickup crew in different parts.
Sorry, Dave, Mark, David is your sound guy, right? Your sound man.
Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure the audience knew. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and so that was how it worked. And so most of, not all, but most of these were filmed in that one round the world trip. There was another trip to Japan, where we spent some time, and another trip that Mark made. We spoke with an artist, an Indonesian artist in New York, but Mark wanted to reshoot that, and he flew up separately to Indonesia with a crew to film that. So he's had a few extra trips, and I've had probably 2 or 3 trips with him. He's had some extras, but he's been very conscientious about covering all the bases that he could. Thank you, Mark, for that. I never really thanked you. I don't think.
So, Bill, you are, I think, folks who watch the film understand now that you're a native of Buffalo, New York, but and first went to Australia for university, right? But what can you tell us about your connection to the place that made you end up essentially spending the rest of your life from the time that you were a young man in Australia?
Look, it was I studied at a place called the Philadelphia College of Art in Pennsylvania, which is now called the University of the Arts. And I received a Fulbright fellowship, and I wanted to explore, as a part of my fellowship, the notion of migration and changes of culture, and as best I could. I'd lived through that as a young person post World War II, right, with all the European migrants, displaced persons coming to America. But I wanted to explore that as an adult and look at it. And Australia was the perfect place. It had the highest per capita influx of migrants any place in the world during the 1960s. So it was a great opportunity to view as an adult and as an artist this notion of how cultures change and how we should be able to live better together than we often do with different cultures. And so I ended up in Melbourne and found that I was already married and had a child, and we loved it. And as much as we enjoy, certainly America still feels very comfortable and very much like home, as Mark was aware when he was filming us there. It's still a very familiar place, and some of the same diners are still there who are still making homemade blueberry pies and things. It's very comfortable, but Australia really has become home, and it was a time in the 1970s when the Australian film industry was really starting to get legs and starting to have its films shown overseas, and the visual arts and writers were starting to be recognized. So it was a very exciting time to be here, and has continued to be. So that's why it's still home.
And you live in the outback now, right? So how far outside of like the cities are you? Like are you in the middle of nowhere?
Oh, I think I'm in the center of a really special place that's about this big. No, I live in the bush, which is different from the outback. The bush is on the way to the outback.
Okay.
But where I live in the bush, right, is still in the state of Victoria, but it is actually in semi-desert country. And so I would, it would be similar to parts of the Southwest, and in terms of climate and all of that. No snow, no, rarely does it hit freezing. But it's a very small community, 1,400 people, and it's 30, 40 miles to the next town of even more than 2,000 people. So it's pretty remote and quite a nice place to be.
So you have a couple of interesting connections to the greater Boston area. So I want to bring them up in part because our very first comment from the audience, from our viewers, is from your friend Mark Skversky, who is with Facing History and Ourselves, which the viewers of the film know from the New York City school where the students are taught about art and activism. But do you want to talk, and so I should mention what Mark wrote here. Bill's been an inspiration to so many of us at Facing History for decades. So do you want to talk about your connection to that organization, which is headquartered in Brookline, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston?
Yeah. Look, Facing History is an inspiration to so many. Thank you to Mark. If I'm an inspiration to some people Facing History is an inspiration to millions around the world in what they do. There's no question about it that with their education programs that they're running through schools is just extraordinary. And the association began in the mid to late 90s, when I was in Boston for another reason, and someone said, "Oh, but with the work that you're doing on a thing called the Peace Project, which was being exhibited fairly widely in America and in Europe at the time," they said, "Oh, you ought to talk to Facing History," and somebody gave me Mark's name, and I went and had a conversation, and very, very welcoming and generous, and looking at what I did and other artists as well, and thinking whatever they embrace, whatever they feel is something that can be taken on board to help people come closer to the notion of peace and human rights reconciliation. And so Mark, as one of the very, very senior people there, very importantly, adopted the work, but also adopted me in the sense as a part of the organization. And I'm very honored to have that, and very pleased, as was Mark, to have Facing History give us access to their students in New York, who are just extraordinary, as you see in the film. Wonderful, wonderful students and teachers.
So I'm going to ask you one other thing about your Boston connections, and then I have a question for Mark Street. This Mark right here. The other organization that's based outside of Boston that you have a connection with is the Peace Abbey, who gave you, I can't remember which year, but they gave you their Courage of Conscience Award, right? And yes. Do you want to tell us what that award means, and maybe, pat yourself on the back a little bit by talking about some of the others who have gotten that award?
Oh goodness, that's.
Or maybe Mark can pick that up if you don't want to answer that, if you prefer that he answer that part of the question.
Well, I don't know that Mark knows that, because Mark's with Facing History, and it's a wonderful.
No, this Mark. This
Mark. Oh. Yeah, well, let Mark the director do part of it as well. But again, part of this story was that this is like the links that are going on with the film and with Newburyport now, is that one person, says, "Oh, look, I think that's really interesting," and they tell another person, they contact another, and it goes like that. And I was introduced to the Peace Abbey, and it happened to be a time when they were doing a very large presentation at, I think it was the Kennedy Center in Boston, or the Kennedy Library.
Kennedy Library, yeah.
Kennedy Library, of awards to a number of people, that the Courage of Conscience Awards, and it included the ones that they were giving at that time included Rosa Parks and I believe Muhammad Ali and certainly I think in also to the family of Martin Luther King Jr. And I was in attendance at that. I was invited to be there by Louis Randa, who is the director of the Peace Abbey. And that was my first introduction to the place. And I maintained an association with him over a period of time. And at one point, they very generously asked me if I would, accept an award. And I was rather taken aback because it was, I just make pictures is what I do. And I understand that there's activism in all of this and the work goes and I travel with it. But I never think of myself in that sort of group of people who are out there as in an important way as those people. And so I was very honored to have received the award.
So Mark Street, can you tell me when you first became aware of Bill's work? I'm sure it was years before you actually crossed paths with him. And were you, I know you can't separate the art from the activism with his work, but would you say that your interest in telling this story comes first from the art or first from the activism?
Yeah, good question. Indeed. Look, I've worked with Bill for a few years. We did a couple of short films, and one of them was about his work in his country town in Victoria. And he set up an arts hub, a community arts hub there. And it was about how the arts can connect the community and bring them all in and can generate sort of a lot of communication and inspire people. It doesn't matter what their talents and what their skills are, but it's about community building. And this is, so weren't talking about art, the finished product necessarily. In that case, it was more about the generating of the community. And this is ongoing, and they have exhibitions. It's wonderful, and for such a small town, it really does, have muscle. So then when we started looking at the bigger picture and Bill's, connections and his history, there's a lot there, and he's well connected and he's well known within the human rights arts field, for sure. But I think what got me was the comment that he made about, can art stop a bullet? Once you pose that question, it begs for an answer, and it begs for an exploration. And I think that's using the big picture and the background and the history that's involved within that picture, all the themes that are involved in that. We start to look at that question, and that's really what started the main film about, is trying to find that answer. Hopefully we got somewhere.
Yes, undoubtedly. So I have a couple of really good audience questions that I'm going to get to now. The first one is from Jess. Hi, Jess, and thanks for asking. And it's for Bill, and the question is, what is the most powerful image you've seen?
There's the most powerful is a tough one, but there certainly are a few. And as the film points out, when I was younger and came across Picasso's Guernica, which was then in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, it's hard to walk past that and to not be moved by it. And when I first came across it, the Vietnam War had not quite started yet, but it gained importance to me as the Vietnam War started to grow and become what the terrible thing that it did become. That particular artwork, not only to me, but to a number of other artists that I knew, including those in New York, and some who Mark has included images of theirs in the film, that particular piece is very, very stunning. Another, of course, is the extraordinary photo by Nguyen of Vietnam napalm of the young Kim Phuc running down the highway.
Right.
And it's hard to not be moved. If there's anyone who's not moved by that, they don't have a soul somehow, I think. Right. And that's one of those sort of absolutely great artworks. But there are so many that I love, right? That to mention to you would not be helpful, because they're by artists who are not famous, who are one from a small informal village in South Africa, whose work would hardly ever get out of South Africa, let alone this small village. Mm-hmm. Others by some artists here in Australia or in small towns in different parts of the world. Not all great art is coming from New York and Paris and London. There's a lot of great art coming from extraordinary artists in small communities. And that's some of the work that I really treasure, as well as those couple that I've mentioned that everyone is aware of.
Right. So here's sort of a follow-up question from another viewer named Jake. Hi, Jake. Thanks for asking. And Jake wants to know, do images in the present day, in 2020, still hold the same power as they used to, given the advent of social media?
Oh, hello, Jake. I'll have Mark speak to that one too.
Okay, sure.
Look, I believe they do. One of the things that happens is that art, visual arts, static visual arts, pictures that like I make, mm-hmm. are a one-to-one experience. A person walks up in front of a picture, and it is the dialogue between them and that picture. There's no one else in that audience. There's no one else that picture is projecting to at that moment. And you can be terribly moved by that. Even in this world of social media, flickering images, things changing every sort of 8 seconds, edits and cuts. And I think that there still has the power to connect with the individual. The advantage, in a way, of electronic media now is that it can tell people about those things. And when you see an image on the screen, on a monitor, on a screen, in another forum, it doesn't have the same resonance, I would say, but at the same time, it can carry the intent. So I still believe that art has importance in that regard. And I really applaud Mark for his belief that that's the case, because he framed these individual works and then found a way of placing them onto the picture in terms of their editing processes and that. And so I take it that if someone like Mark sees an artwork of mine and says, oh, I'm moved by that, I want to do something with that, then it's a confirmation that I believe that art can still, static images, influence people's thinking.
Well, that maybe leads to a good question for Mark, which is that, the way that you unveiled the work when it was done near the end of the film as the scroll that it basically is, right? But like, that slow pan all the way up the piece of work, that was, I mean, in hindsight, it seems like that's the only way to show it, really, if you want to get a close-up of it, because it's so tall, right? But it also is a really powerful way to look at it, right? And you're doing that, obviously we're not standing in front of it at the library. We're watching it on a small screen, right? So, was that like a stroke of genius of yours, or was it just like, well, that's the only way we can film it, right?
No, exactly right.
It was a stroke of genius.
The picture doesn't appear in many galleries, that's for sure. I did say to Bill, where else can we exhibit this? And he said, well, it's 4 stories high. I mean, if you can find a building to house that, good luck. Not many places will. But yes, look, I think also because as you go up the picture, you're revealing it, and we've seen all those pictures through the film. We've looked at why they're there, and it's a way of reflecting back on them. And as you uncover each one, you're starting to reflect back on its story in the film and how it, and then you end up on the top as with the birds, the freedom and the space. So it's kind of, you know, it's a nice way to do it, but you're right, it's the only way to do it.
Right.
If I just mention the previous question, we did ask that question of Nikut in Los Angeles when we interviewed him. And he had photographed the Vietnam napalm, the most iconic image from that period. And we said to him, do you see any pictures today that could be as powerful as yours and have as much impact as that one? And then we talked about the photograph of the young boy washed up on the beach, the dead body which we do have a shot of it in the film, and we've referred to that as being similar in a way to having an impact as powerful as that. He noted that there was one small difference, that the boy was dead instead of managed to like Kim Phuc, who's continued his relationship with her for 40 years after. So, but he felt there was a difference because we're not allowed to photograph things in particular war zones anymore. So there's a restriction in the way that you cover events over there. Not so much, you know, here on the streets, but certainly in war zones, conflict zones.
We have another sort of comment / question from a viewer named Joanne. Thanks for the question, and she just wants to know. She's basically saying that you created a great balance, Mark, as the filmmaker of between telling William's story and the other artist and activist story that William introduces you to and brings you along with to meet up with. Was it a collaboration is kind of the question she wants to know between the two of you, you know, in terms of deciding how the film would progress.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely collaboration all the way. And a lot of the people in the film are people that Bill collaborates with. So we include those. But look, you have to know Bill, you have to know his background, you have to know a little bit about him to realize how he does this work. But there's so many other voices that lend themselves to those sort of themes and subjects. And, you know, it's important to be as international as we can, talk to as many different countries, different age groups, different sexes, different religions, like try to get a bit more, a broader, diverse opinion to some of this stuff. And, you know, and you can see how universal it is when you do that. Look, yes, it is important. And although Bill didn't see the editing process and the way we put it together, he was, well, shall I say, at arm's length a little bit, but he did come in later in the piece, and so it was unveiled to him, and he could, you know, discuss it through to the final stages there. So a great process, really.
If I can add to that, just one thing is that I signed a contract, right? This is all very, very formal, and it's very friendly, right? Altogether, there's no question about that. But I wanted Mark to know that he had the freedom to do what he wished with the film. You know, understanding that we knew each other, and I knew that he would be, you know, treat my work somewhat seriously and be respectful of the other artists, because he's very respectful of people, just generally speaking. But effectively what the contract did that I signed said, I have no control over the film itself. That's your thing. And I would introduce him ideas about what about this person or this place or this thing. And Mark would put it through the very fine-grained sieve of his mind and edit in or edit out how he felt things would fit or who he felt might contribute to the story. And so that's that's how that works. So the collaboration was very, very real in the sense of conversational stuff and heading in the right direction. But all of the decisions about who ultimately went in and how it went in and what it ended up with, as Mark said, I was at arm's length. I would say that I was probably at a long pole's length from all of that. But I was allowed to make some comments near the end, which sometimes he paid attention to. But it was a very good, it was a good way to do it. And trust is important in these issues.
Bill, my next question for you, in the film, you talk a little bit about your upbringing, and, you're talking about how at the time of your upbringing in Buffalo or near Buffalo, there's kids in different neighborhoods who are essentially in sort of 13-year-old gangs together just because, if you wander into the wrong neighborhood, you're not friends with those kids. So, that was kind of I assume that was kind of your introduction to a little bit of violence. But I'm not sure that that I know the answer to the rest of this question, which is, that's not a question at all, but this is, can you pinpoint where your lifelong commitment to peace activism comes from? Why are you so committed to it? I mean, generally speaking, most of us would like to see peace in the world, and most of us are averse to violence. What is it about you that makes that has made you commit your entire life to pursuing it and trying to figure it out? Why we can't have total peace in the world?
Look, that's a terrific question, and one which I wish I would have a really good answer to. But there is, as with complicated sort of stories in a sense, there's a simple thing. One is that when I was growing up, it was pretty much not just being a gang at 13, it was being a gang at 7, right? And 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13. And just never understanding, absolutely never understanding why people wanted to hurt each other. I found it incomprehensible. What it is in me that found it incomprehensible, I don't know. But one of the things is that I didn't really enjoy getting beaten up. Right? And I found that if I was in a fight with someone, at the end, even if I won, I didn't make me feel happy. I didn't feel good about that. I had survived that fight, but it wasn't as if, gee, I've done a great thing. I've achieved something. I've just survived another day. And I guess from a lot of it was from maybe the idea of reading. The library, Mark points out this small library in Lackawanna, which is on the border of South Buffalo. I went to that library so often as a young child, a 7, 8, 9, 6-year-old even, and read my way pretty much through that, and found that there's another world out there than the one that I was living. And as I got into my teenage years, I started thinking there's got to be a better way to do this, to move through this world. And that sounds a bit high-minded for a 17-year-old, but it wasn't just escapism. I don't have to get out of here. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, this doesn't seem right. How can I start to evaluate what might make this world seem more sensible? And that took me to reading most of the writers that I read, including Václav Havel, because I know that the Prague Spring thing is coming, and I've got a lovely artwork by Václav Havel that he did a concrete poem of his, that I started coming across writers and poets and filmmakers and visual artists. Those are the ones I was drawn to who ask these questions. And they are often the ones on that foundation at the bottom with those names that have helped me think differently about this world.
You in the piece, in the big picture, you give a lot of credit to all of your various influences and heroes. When I was growing up in the sort of 70s and 80s, I remember reading somewhere, someone tried to make the case there are no more heroes anymore. It was partly about how the the big figures of the 60s, so many were assassinated, or there was so much distress over those types of things. But some of it, I think, was also just sort of about, I mean, I was a big sports fan as a kid, and it was like the athletes are no longer these like sort of larger than life figures. They've been exposed, they're like whatever they have going on behind the scenes, like Babe Ruth, nobody knew about what was going on when he was carousing. He just seemed like a larger than life, amazing, superhuman person. And I always thought that the idea that there are no more heroes was a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea to share with anyone, terrible idea to promote, terrible idea to argue. And you clearly are making the piece itself talks about your influences and your own heroes.
I have millions of heroes. You see, that's one of the things. It's kind of like the downgrading of heroes and the upgrading of the common person. Common people like me. Mark's a hero. I suspect that you too are a hero. I know that Mark Skaversky's a hero. Louis Randa is a hero. These people who are just really good people doing their job out in the world, not just in the arts and not just in human rights and social justice, but being just in what they do, being reconciliatory in what they do, being human in what they do. And so for me, in a sense, the reason that it was important to not just mention 8 names, right, as these are my heroes, it's that I see so many people as being so important to this role. And one of the lovely things that Mark has been working very conscientiously on is this network thing to say, the more that people in Newburyport, right, and people in Oxford and in not the Oxford, Mississippi, although that's a very good one too, Faulkner's hometown, another hero, that the connections we make, the more we realize that we're not just these individual people, and me in this little town, 1,400 people in the bush in Australia, I'm a part of this, a very small part, this much wider group of people doing wonderful things. And I think that's the part of the important story that Mark's been able to help tell.
Mark, do you have anything to add to that? Or do I mean, I don't know, I think you both know each other pretty well. I don't know if you'd want to say it, but I have a feeling Bill is a hero of yours, and has become more so in the making of the film. Although you're probably going to tease each other about it, right?
Exactly. No, hey, he's my human rights mentor. Without him, I wouldn't know. We've had a great journey learning along the way. I've met lots of great people, and absolutely. But talking about individuals, like one of the people in the film, for instance, was Zakiya Basu from London, who is just an individual who just thought that what had happened that day on London Bridge was so bad, she had to do something about it. And this is just one person. We're not talking about anyone famous or well known, and I think it's important to show that sort of thing too, that it can be one person and anybody can do that sort of stuff. So and make quite a difference, and she certainly did. And I think there's a few. Emmy in Oxford is another one that was similar like that. She works with individuals, and if you can save a life as she does, it's quite a remarkable thing. And you don't see her on the big screen anywhere, well, apart from our big screen. But they're incredible people.
If I can just jump in for a second, that's a great person to mention, Zakiya, because Zakiya is a public servant in London. She works for the government and in office behind a desk. And when this terrorist attack happened on London Bridge a couple of years ago, she just felt that she had to do something, and spoke with some of her friends, and then formed this organization, 1,000 Roses. So yes, it's stunning where these ideas come from and who they come from, and how influential they can be worldwide.
Right. We have one more question from an audience member. This is Elena. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she's asking about basically about COVID. She wants to know, and Bill, obviously you're in a rural part of the country, so you're away from. I think you talked about this before we went live. You're saying that you're essentially safe from it because everybody's so spread out where you are anyway. So you're socially distanced in the first place, right? So, her question is basically, do you think that the COVID situation will make a difference to the way people cooperate or conduct warfare, or how people interact with each other? It's an interesting question. Do you either of you have thoughts on that?
Mark, you want to go first?
Well, you're doing a collaborative work project, even if you are isolated, Bill. So maybe it's better for you to talk about that, because that's quite a wonderful idea.
I don't know about conducting warfare in that, but what maybe this is doing, and as you have mentioned, that before, relative to the festival, I'm saying is that you're connecting with people who are not necessarily just from Newburyport, and that it's taking the voice of Newburyport further afield, and your voice as well, and similarly also with what we're doing here. But so the connections amongst the people who are interested in this notion of collaborating is become much more possible because we've become more used to using this media as opposed to remaining independent filmmakers and waiting for cinema to open up and all of that. And as a visual artist, the reference that Mark's making is that I've been doing what I refer to as a COVID collaboration project with probably 30 artists around the world, from Morocco to India to France, England, Ireland, North America, Australia, and where I've started an artwork, a limited edition, or with a digital print, which I then forward via electronically to these other artists, and then they add to it and manipulate it or draw on it and put text, and some are poets and that, and then send it back, and I work on it, and so we have this long-term collaborative project now, which is really fascinating because it's about their view of the world, and the images that come back is not just about COVID, about what they're thinking about at this time in the world of the COVID-19 crisis. And some of it is Black Lives Matter, some of it's indigenous issues with a wonderful Native American artist, Edgar Heapabirds from the Midwest, and Aboriginal artists here. So it's opened up doors and windows to opportunities that we haven't had before. And I'm hoping that this may make us think a little bit more critically about our governments. Not that too many people who are watching your program don't think critically about governments already, but to act in ways which are local and global.
Mm-hmm. The artwork that you're talking about sounds fascinating. Is it going to be one collage type piece of art that you mentioned a print? Is it going to be like one piece of art, or is it a series of pieces of art?
No, it'll be one artwork collaboration with me and each of these individuals. It'll be 30 separate pieces.
Oh, I see. Right. Collaboration between you and each of the collaborators. One piece per. Right. Okay. Where can people see that? Where would people be able to see those?
I don't know yet. I haven't spoken to Mark about this, but there may be a little short film coming out.
Okay. Got it.
There will be something online at some point in the not too distant future. The works are completed now, and they're all in. But there's multiple ways of presenting them, and one could be an online exhibition, and one could be a physical exhibition.
Right.
But I'm thinking that there's a little bit of a story in there for a very short film that might bring it to life.
So when that gets produced, we'll just see you back here next September, right?
Oh, absolutely so. Yeah. I think, what's that, Mark?
I said we would love to be there now, but if we can't be there now, let's try next year.
Well, right. Meet me back here on Zoom next year at this time with your film if we can't do it in person. But so that actually really looking forward to seeing that how those projects unfold. And thank you so much to both of you for spending the time. It's almost lunchtime for you, so enjoy every sandwich, as they say. And Bill and Mark, thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks, James. It's been terrific.
That's wonderful.